thank you for joining us this afternoon. It is a pleasure to welcome so many colleagues from around the UK and perhaps beyond to, I've lost track of the numbers of the combined Look and View webinar series. I'm John Milligan. I'm team leader at the Virtual School Sensory Support in Norfolk, and I'm attempting to facilitate today. We have an esteemed panel with us this afternoon. And what I'd like to do initially is just to introduce them very briefly and get them to introduce themselves also briefly, and then we will launch into the discussion. Please use the chat facility. We have 2 or 3 colleagues monitoring the chat facility if you've got any questions as we go. So here we go. We have on the panel today, we have Anna, who's a teacher of vision impairment at the R&IB College in Loughborough. Thank you for the wave, Anna. Nice to see you. We have Ellen. Ellen Johnson is a parent and mother of Theo, who's a congenitally blind Braille user at a school in Cambridge. Ellen, if that is enough information about. We have Jean, who's a QTVI. Jean specialises in literacy and works in, or is based in Reading, in the Royal Counties, I believe they may are known at times. And we have Stacey. Stacey is a publisher and relationship manager. So if you want to talk to her about relationships afterwards, she'll stay online. But her main job is R&IB book share, as opposed to writing an agony column for TVIs and those who work with them. But maybe that's something R&IB could branch out into at some point. So first of all, could I hand over to Ellen just to give a brief update on Look and where we stand with organisations working with Look.
Thanks, John. So I'm Ellen. I'm the events coordinator for Look. For anyone who doesn't know, Look's a small national charity supporting visually impaired children, young people and families, mainly through our online mentoring, peer mentoring service, and through our events, which we've obviously had to move online during lockdown. We've been holding different events throughout lockdown and for our community, and what we found is that parents and professionals need slightly different kind of topics. So we're working with View to put on these kind of tandem events. So this is a second in this kind of series, and what we're doing is we're holding a parent event first and then a professionals event afterwards, both on the same topic. So the first one of these we did was on the topic of supporting transition for children who are in year 6 going into secondary school. So we did that last month, and then this one now is our second of these series. So last week we held our event for parents on the topic of literacy and how to support their VI children's literacy at home. And now we are here so we can feed back the kind of information that we gathered from parents at that event to you. And that, so we had a couple of panelists who are here today who were also at that parents event. So Ellen Johnson and Jean were both at last week's event, and there was a really good discussion. And it's the kind of discussion and questions that came up in last week that we've used to inform what we will be asking our panelists today. So I'll hand over back to John to go to our panelists.
Thank you, Ellen. Okay, let's launch straight into the discussion. As I said earlier, we'll get the panel to introduce themselves briefly. The questions that we'll be asking, each panel member has agreed to take a question on that sort of fell out of the parental discussion last Tuesday evening. So Ellen Johnson, if we could start with you first and perhaps talk about your personal experience with Theo growing up and developing a love of literacy, and maybe some of the challenges of working with a reluctant Braille user at times, and how that is linked to his learning and his emotions as a vision impaired young person.
I'll have a go. Hello, everyone. I'm a parent of Theo, who's now 13. But yeah, it's been a real privilege to be part of his literacy journey so far, as well as being a parent. I'm a qualified teacher, and I love books. And I guess for me, that was the worry. How will I share that with this little baby who I've been told is blind? So that was emotional for me. I don't think he was particularly emotional at all about Braille when he was younger, because that was his norm. So I guess I learned that there were tactile books, and that helped. And we made things like information books that were tactile, because he liked information books. And I guess it was about plugging into what he enjoyed. So that was my first learning, that's plugging into what he enjoyed. And learning that helped me with my emotions around it. And I guess what I learned then was that QTBIs, they can give every single family a gift, and that gift is to show that family, in whatever way works for that family, that they can be part of their child's literacy experience, and whatever way it takes. What really brought Theo alive was learning that was writing together, actually. So this is a little brown book that I'm waving at the camera. He wrote it one half term when he was about 4 with me. It's got some Braille on it. It says half term. He was ill in bed, and that's the Calpol syringe. We were giving him Calpol. And we made all the pictures together. This is a sad face, a sofa. He made them together. He could talk his way through that story. He could share it with us, with his friends, with his family. And just this really simple thing just opened literacy up for our family. We realized how much it was just normal. Things that helped were the practical stuff the QTBIs did. They made sure there was a brailler at home. They made sure I knew about this plastic sticky backing that's on the front there, and gave me some basic rudimentary help. This was all in grade 1 Braille. And the other thing that really helped was the fact that this was based on our personal experience of Theo. So actually just saying, look, stuff you do in your normal life is literacy. And so we took a half term where he'd been ill on the sofa most of the time, and we turned that into a literacy experience. And actually he did go on a journey and collect objects. So just kind of grabbing an object from the journey. And then he did finally get to go skiing. So I think we've got some pictures of sledges and things in the book too. But just that turned into literacy for us as a family, and showing the family, giving us confidence to understand that was really helpful. I'm going to wave another book at you now. So he's older now. This is another thing that helped. This is a book that Theo wanted to read because a friend recommended it. They said, oh, I'm reading Hive. What about you? So I'm talking about reluctant boy reading Braille here. So he said, oh, I want to read that book. Well, the REI service actually found this on Seeing Ear. They downloaded it. They embossed it out. I actually find it really helpful as a parent that it's got the print in there as well. I know not everyone can do that, but it really helps us parents because it doesn't feel so alien, and it means we can share the reading. The other thing, another family might find actually just a pack of Braille cards, Braille cards. It can open up Braille to that family because it can show you how it can be part of social stuff. So I've got social Braille written down here on my list, and literacy is social. It's not something you sit and do on your own, and just opening that out to sharing it is really important, I think. The other thing that you might want to think about that helped us was finding ways to show the family that an iPad, for example, with apps like Borleyland can be used with a younger child. They might see other young children using them and think, my child wouldn't be able to do that, but with an app like that, they can. So that sort of thing. The other things that helped with reluctance are, again, going to what the family want, what the child wants. His interest is tech. RNIB do some great tech magazines. It took me ages to find out about them. He loves reading them. They also can send you first news in an accessible format to your inbox. It took us ages. We didn't realize Theo could access on his own without us the news every week. Last week, not last week, but a few weeks ago, he was on the front of it. But we didn't even know he could access it. So that was really, really helpful, those sorts of things. And then with support with the skills at home for touch typing and that sort of thing has given him access to those things too. But one other big thing that's helped with, I suppose you could say reluctance, but also just to support the whole thing, is us as a family understanding what we can do around concept development, how important that is. If, for example, castles has been coming up, it's been so helpful if that's been shared with us. Then we're not necessarily going to visit a castle, but we might put it in on the list of things to do that weekend coming up. If he's done that, he can then join in with the literacy experience at school. And over the years, that has made such a difference to his ability to engage and his confidence. And our confidence as a family are that we can be a part of that journey for him. So it's support having fun with literacy, all ages and stages. make it natural for the family to join in. I'm going to wave a great big advent calendar at you now. That might be what the family want. They might want help with how to make an advent calendar independently accessible, or just a normal calendar. That's just a braille and print sheet of a normal calendar. I put that on a magnet board and we could count down to birthdays and stuff like that. My final thing I'm going to wave at you, and I'm going to let someone else have a turn, is this is a Valentine's card that Thea made for me. And as a parent, getting a card that he's drawn and being able to read that message in Braille that he's written all by himself, that's all the motivation I need. So if you can help a family to get to that point, you've given them that gift, and they've got that forever.
Ellen, thank you for that insight into your life with Theo as well. And I think one of the things that did come out last week was this, it's that link between settings, services, families, and the child themselves is so important. And if there's one thing that we all learn, it's keeping those communication channels open and working both ways as well. Jean, in or down across in Berkshire, the question that you said you would pick up from last week was actually looking at the opportunities that have presented themselves from remote working during this lockdown period as well. And you said you would put together a list of a few that you and colleagues have experienced.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yeah, so I've been working at home since the school's shut. Also, a couple of my students were already shielding because of their medical conditions. So I started doing some remote teaching quite early on. So remote one-to-one lessons really with children from my youngest for one-to-one lesson is 5 years old. I'd say year one. Other things are more interactions with parents, and the child was there. But the one-to-one lessons I've done via Zoom, via Google Meet, or by phone. And I've shared resources by sharing my screen, by emailing resources that can be viewed on a screen on an iPad or a laptop. And also I've shared resources via Google Classroom, so links and quizzes and things like that can be accessed with a Braille Note Touch. Braille Note Touch Plus is better than a Braille Note Touch, I'm afraid, and also with any other device. So then on top of that, which I think has been absolutely vital, from the beginning, I delivered actual concrete materials. So I delivered Braille books and diagrams. And then on an ongoing basis, as we've been going along, I've been delivering more Braille objects to go with stories and manipulatives, mainly for maths, things like Dean's blocks and things like that, and abacus, but the objects for the literacy. So then I've been teaching, what I've actually been teaching is literacy through Braille and all print. So they've had their Braille resources there, and I've actually worked through the program I would have done if they'd been in school. It's been slightly different, but mainly it's been the same program that I would have been teaching them. And we've done listening skills. So they've ranged from just very basic auditory attention to developing enhanced listening to speeded up text. So that's really been with my secondary age pupils. And then also, especially with the secondary age pupils, but actually with the little ones as well, use of technology, because part of those deliveries in the beginning, there was technology involved. So if they didn't have access to technology in their home, with either the service or the school were then we then made sure that happened. So an iPad at home, if that was going to help. Yeah, that for one child who uses an Mountbatten, and we only have one of those, but we delivered it to his house in the end so that he could use that rather than the Perkins, because he was so used to using his Mountbatten, and I didn't want those correct finger usages to go out because he was using Perkins again, and he's not strong enough. So he's got the Mountbatten. That's been brilliant, because also the parent has been able to share what he does without me with me after the lesson, and or even with in the lesson, so it can be connected to the iPad. So that's been really good. So the same with all the technology, actually, that's helped me to actually see what they have done in the lesson. So then I've also taught skills. Some of my students, they ordered those Orbit readers with my encouragement when they were on this with the special grant for £40, because I said this is a really good backup. It used to be your backup. So I've had time to teach them how to use it, and that has involved doing a lot of voiceover training as well, which we generally in school don't have time for, and they just sort of get by with the minimum, a lot of them. So yeah, we've done quite a bit of that, which has been really useful. And then on top of that, I've also done some math skills. So the opportunities it's really sort of presented for me is this really the working relationship I've built with the families, because some of the families that were reluctant to communicate before have really seen the value of this, and yeah, they've had me in their house basically on a weekly or bi-weekly or even tri-weekly in some cases basis. So so there's been that you know, close communication about their child's learning, and you know, and just how they are. So I've been to offer emotional support during the time when it was really close lockdown, when we weren't really allowed to go anywhere. And they've also seen how I teach their child, because sometimes it's very hard as a parent. I'm a parent myself, not of a visually impaired child, but I've had 2 boys growing up, and it's not easy with your own children. They very often will do things for their teacher that they won't do for you. And so actually working together about the expectations of what they're going to do, so everyone has heard it, about what the expectations of what they're going to do before the next lesson, I think has been really helpful. And it's also been really helpful because I've been able to give them ideas around the text that's been read. So if we read something, then for example, after the lesson, they were playing dressing up, because that was part of what they were reading about different dressing up as different things. Or they had other ideas for activities after the lesson in which they sort of connected to the text. They would use objects. I would send objects for the text, and then they would change them and make their own stories afterwards. And I would encourage them to go off and gather objects as soon as my lesson had finished, so that they could tell their own story. Then I think the writing, as Ellen said, in actual fact, because it's much easier in the beginning to write rather than read, that really then sparks that interest in the written word if they're writing their own texts. One child has been writing letters and postcards to all of their friends, and another one has been doing lots of stories. Just, you know, they've just started writing their own stories during this time. They've had more time to do this. They're less tired because they don't go to school. So if you've got their interest, then they're actually doing something often independently where they wouldn't have done before. So also the parents, it sparked that, because they've been there, and sometimes they've actually brailled things for the children where they haven't done that at all before, because they saw, oh, that would be really useful if they then had this, and Jean hasn't got time to do it before my next lesson, so I'll do it. And yeah, so that's really, so sometimes their own Braille learning has accelerated. And my last point is that another thing is it's been possible to be there for some emotional support where I wouldn't necessarily have been in that close contact before. One teenager in particular, who's losing her sight, we were able to have a dialogue with the 3 of us there, which we probably wouldn't have had before, and which the teenager was able to speak to me, but with her father there and her mother there, where she probably wouldn't have done, or she was finding it difficult to do when I wasn't there. Whereas she was so used to talking about her sight to me, but apparently not to her parents. So, you know, that's a unique situation, but there I was able to facilitate that. That's it. So yeah, there's been loads of opportunities.
Thank you, Jean, for that update. We will, I think, no doubt come back to lockdown working in different ways of delivering a service as the discussion progresses. But now, it's a bit like Eurovision, across to Loughborough. As I said, Anna teaches at Loughborough College, and I think one of the things that we'd all agree is COVID and lockdown hasn't stopped new referrals. And one of the questions that came out last week was around when to start learning Braille. Should it be at the point of diagnosis? It's a question we often get from parents.
My experience is mainly working with 16 plus, but I try to make what I'm going to say as broad as possible. My initial reaction to that question was yes, absolutely, but then I came up with several factors that I thought needed to be taken into consideration before you started teaching the young person Braille. And I think, as Jean said, the first one is definitely emotional readiness. Is the person ready emotionally to accept that their sight has deteriorated or that they have lost their sight, and are they therefore ready to move from print to a tactile way of learning? I've had one particular student whose sight was deteriorating, and the majority of my Braille lessons with him were him talking and crying about the fact that his sight had got worse. So I think that is a key consideration. At the point of diagnosis, are they ready emotionally to learn Braille? The second factor I thought was important was, is it a realistic time frame? If they're about to do GCSEs or about to do A-levels or anything else that's sort of those important milestones, do they have enough time to learn Braille within that time frame? I think for young people, for children, they probably will learn Braille quicker as if they're younger. For adults or young adults, it can take a little bit longer to learn Braille, particularly because sometimes they're also battling those emotional difficulties as well. The third factor that I thought was important was their style of learning. I had a student whose style of learning was definitely auditory. He learned Braille. He remembered all of the contractions. He was a competent reader of Braille. What he couldn't do was read and understand what he was actually reading, because he was spent so much time focusing on the decoding of the Braille rather than listening to what he was reading so that he could understand it. So for him, it would have been better for him to actually have the work in audio rather than for him to read it himself. The fourth consideration that I thought of, and I'm sure there's loads more, is the levels of literacy. Most people would say that you need to have a certain level of literacy to learn Braille, and I agree with that. I think that you do need to have a certain level. However, I would also say that if you've got somebody who doesn't have that level of literacy, and I'm talking sort of a 16-year-old, they should still be given the opportunity to try to learn Braille. I've got two examples, exactly the opposite. So two students, both working at pre-GCSE level, both wanted to learn Braille. The first one learnt it instantly, and within a very short time, she was away reading grade 1, very quickly moved on to grade 2. And now, I think she left 2 years ago, she keeps emailing me to tell me which book she's finished in grade 2. So she's just finished James and the Giant Peach, which she's carrying on with the Braille, which is brilliant. Same sort of learner, same level of learner, couldn't get past the letters of her name. That was as far as she could go. She couldn't remember anything beyond her name, no matter what strategies we used, no matter what memory aids we used, she just couldn't remember it. So I think levels of literacy is very important, but don't assume that they're not going to be able to learn Braille. The last factor I thought was access to technology. I love Braille, but I also love technology. And I think sometimes people might say it's an either or situation, whereas I think Braille, when you teach Braille, you should also be teaching technology, different kinds of technology. So it doesn't have to be Braille technology, although that is great. Braille technology is very, very expensive, and there are alternatives such as Microsoft Seeing AI on iPads, which is brilliant, Synaptic, which is another thing I use, the Orbit readers, which are great. So there's lots of technology that I think should be taught alongside the learning of Braille. So those are my 5 considerations, and I'm sure there's lots more, and I'm sure that you all know this anyway, but that's what I was thinking. Thank you, John.
Anna, that's great, thank you. I did pause there so I didn't talk over you as I so rudely did at the start. That was good, and I think what applies to the older students also applies to newly diagnosed students that we work with as well, and they are common themes across all the children, young people and families that we work with. I'm sure we will explore them as we progress. Stacey, having introduced you as a relationship manager, the question that came out last week was around RNIB's work with publishers, especially specialist publishers in the sort of education field. What's the current position regarding making images more accessible, be it as tactile, auditory, and how will this filter its way through to the families and children and services?
It's a really great and important question. So as most of you will know, I manage the RNIB Bookshare service, which is a digital collection of ebooks essentially that you can download in a variety of different formats. So we currently have about 570,000 of those books up there. But what we are not saying, and what we don't want anyone to think we're saying, is, oh, well, we've got the books on the platform now, they're fully accessible. And I'm sure you've all come across situations where you've been handed a book and you've been told it's accessible, and certainly perhaps the wording is, and you can read it with a screen reader, you can magnify it and it looks great. But in the middle of it is a wonderful picture that for a visually impaired child, they don't have access to. So a common example of this, we have a lot of music content that we get transcribed and it's called accessible. And I'm always sort of banging back at the door going, well, it's not though, because there's a big score in the middle of it, which I'm sure would be amazing. But it's a picture. And for a lot of screen reader users in particular, or children who can't access it even through magnification, it then doesn't make that content accessible. So RNIB Bookshare currently has 3,000 images that are tactile and described images. So they're in a sort of resource page that you can access through the service for free. But what they're not, and you'll appreciate this, is they're not in the books. So RNIB, me in particular, we do a lot of work with publishers to look at how do we make books fully accessible, and it is a slow process. Because I'm blind since birth, so I went through the education system, and even 10 years ago, I just decided on a whim I'd do a maths degree. And so when parents or teachers talk to me about the frustrations of an inaccessible image, I absolutely understand it, and I'm completely on board with that. I used plasticine and pipe cleaners and things and coins to do my degree, and it wasn't that long ago. However, what we have seen through publishers, we work with 850 of them at the moment on a regular basis to get content to us. And we're seeing so much more engagement from publishers now on how to make that content accessible, but how to get image descriptions embedded into their workflow. So what we don't want to see is we're waiting on a parent or a teacher to say to a publisher, this image isn't accessible, and the publisher says, okay, well, we'll consider how to make it accessible, and maybe 3 months later you'll have the book. We don't want that. We want it to be embedded in the workflow so that when publishers are producing the content, they know that they need to put described images in there. So some of the resources that now exist to help with that, we have a Benetech initiative called Diagram Centre and the Born Accessible initiative. So they work with a lot of publishers now who can get a certification that their content is born accessible. And what that means is that every aspect of it has to be accessible. So from the wording through to the diagrams, everything has to be described, tactile, and available for anyone, regardless of their level of sight. The other one is Textbox Digital. who have just launched last year, and they operate a service for describing images at any level. So in RNIB Bookshare, we work with any ages. So we have very young children, 3 and 4 years old, who are just developing their literacy skills, straight through to adults who are currently in education. So we recognize the need to have images and diagrams described at all levels, because having access to images is part of the story, is part of the journey. There's a reason that pictures are put in there. Either it's to help the reader become more engaged, or it's to pass on information. And if you are a visually impaired person, you're not getting that information, so you're not getting full access to the education that you need. So Textbox have worked with a number of publishers now to make their content accessible, to describe the images, and to make them available in tactile form. So that's something that we've seen a lot of engagement on, and particularly through the Publishers Association, have launched a group a few years ago called the Accessibility Action Group. And that is a group that's comprised of a lot of publishers, a lot of the key publishers, Taylor & Francis, HarperCollins, Penguin, some of the university presses. And one of the topics that comes up in those meetings a lot is image descriptions. How do we make them accessible? What do we do? How do we embed it in the workflow? And where do we put that information? So for example, do we have 2 separate books, one with described images and one without? Do we put it in an index at the end? So RNIB Bookshare works to try and support publishers with these questions. And we do partner with people like Benetech, as I mentioned, and Textbox to give the best experience that we can. There's an interesting feature on the Textbox website, and it's called Searchbox. And what it allows you to do is to contact any publisher that you can get hold of. So there's about 3,500 publishers information up there. And the reason I mention this is because one of the key things that we like to encourage as well is to give everyone a voice. So publishers need to know what is required. They need to know that people need these images described, and that to put a book online or to enlarge the content doesn't make it fully accessible. So one of the other key things we need publishers to do, and that we try and put the message across to them, is to have the accessibility information embedded in their metadata. So that, for example, if you're on RNIB Bookshare and you're looking for a book, you should be able to see, this book actually contains described images or tactile images. So we'll open this one instead of the other one that doesn't. And as a part of that, it's about raising awareness that, we have these books, they have accessible images in them. How do we get them into the hands of people that need them? So certainly on RNIB Bookshare, we'll promote that as much as possible. We'll have a dedicated section as we do, and we're looking to open that up this year, and particularly next year when we see publishers who are working with the likes of Textbox and Benetech. So we would love to be able to have a space where we can have all of these books and have all of these images and add to that 3,000 that we've got, but in a more meaningful way, so that they're connected with books, and that they're in the books, and that the content is easily found. We completely understand you don't want to download a whole book and then go and find a separate image and try and find if that links to the part that you're reading. It's not a good use of time for anyone supporting a learner, and it's not going to be an easy way for a learner to access the content. So we do fully understand that. And going forward, any work that we can do with you, with educators, with parents, to have a joint message to send to publishers and creators to say, we need this content to be accessible, then we're more than happy to get on board with that, absolutely.
Leslie, that's great, thank you. And I think that's really useful to sort of just get a state of the nation sort of position for all the services involved today about where we are, that we can take back the setting we work with the students and to the families. The questions have been pouring in as the presentations have gone ahead. I was really struck there by 570,000 items sitting in Bookshare. I did make a note of it because that will be a challenge for some of the students we work with, I think, to work their way through that over the next few years. One of the other points that was raised was the app that I think was called Ballyland. Please somebody nod or say yes. Yep. Thank you. And somebody's put on, this is available on sonokids.org. SONO kids.org. I'll leave you all to your technology to follow that up. So looking at the questions, Angie asked the panel, and I'm going to just pick somebody out when I ask the question, what the panel think is the best age to introduce the Braille Note Touch. So Jean, you used that phrase. So can we go to you first?
Really depends on the child and what else you're using beforehand. So the Braille Note Touch is a very complex piece of equipment. It's very expensive, isn't it? So, I mean, we've been sort of experimenting with different ideas. It also depends, I think, if the child has some sight, some useful sight, because I've been using with my year one Brailleist an iPad in Connect and also a Mountbatten. And because we now decided to go with Mountbattens, I know other people have already used them, I don't feel the need to go into a Braille Note Touch so quickly or into some electronic another electronic Braille note taker so early. So I mean, I would say personally it would be at some point in Key Stage 2, getting maybe year, I mean, we've done it earlier, to be honest, we've done it earlier, but I would say maybe year 3, year 4, year 5. But it would be good for them to have some basic skills before going up to secondary school. But yeah, there are other options, obviously. You might be using a Braille display with a tablet or with a laptop or with a, or you might be, yes, you might be using a different Braille note taker, a Braille Sense, for example. They're really good. I like those too.
Anna, do you have a view on technology? If we broaden it?
Yeah. I think it depends on the student, on the young person, because some people just seem to like tech, and it doesn't matter what technology you throw at them, they just absorb it and absolutely love it. I mean, I had a student not that long ago who, within one session, had practically learnt all he needed to use the Polaris, and he had only just started grade 1. So I think it does depend on whether the person likes technology or not. So yeah, I wouldn't say a specific age, because I think it depends on them.
Thank you, Anna. Ellen and Stacey, I'm going to actually move us on to the next question, because we've got quite a few to get through. And Ellen, you've already said that Theo is a fiend for technology, and I'm guessing, Stacey, you're a user as well.
Yes, yeah, big fan.
Claire asked the question, well, it was a comment really about how you can't overestimate the power of developing strong links with the families. Ellen, would you like to pick up that as a thought?
Yeah, I completely agree. I suppose for me, you know, education and learning doesn't stop at the school gate, does it? And particularly for blind children, you know, my son's completely blind. The world has to be brought to him in a way. That's what I've learned. And that's almost, you know, best done, or particularly strongly can be done at home and out and about, and when you're just living life. So I think if you work together, there's this huge amount you can achieve. Yeah.
That's great, thank you. And Stacey, do you have a view on links with families?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, something that we've seen a lot more actually through NIB Bookshare due to COVID-19. I think before we had a lot of interaction with teachers on behalf of learners, but since COVID-19, you know, we've had a lot more engagement with parents and with families looking to support their children at home, and I think that's been really important for us as well, to learn how we can help facilitate that. So again, it's looking at the sort of content, the way we share it, the way we promote it, and it's been a really interesting experience for us to have that experience, even if it didn't come under the best circumstances. It's been really interesting to see the questions that come from parents wanting to support their children.
That's really interesting, because one of the things we've found in Norfolk is adorning, with some families, adorning on families of the impact that their child's vision impairment has on learning. Whereas in the past, and I've been saying this in a few environments for the last few weeks, some families it was the service and the school's responsibility to essentially support their child, and they are now seeing that not necessarily severely VI children, but also children with a less severe VI and using NATSIP criteria. They're suddenly realizing that there's things that there are many more obstacles in their child's way than perhaps they realized prior to the lockdown. A comment from Sue. Sue said that she'd noted the acceleration in Braille literacy for 2 particular students she was working with. Jean, back to you. Have you seen a change perhaps in literacy levels with some of the students you and colleagues are working with down there?
Yeah, in common with some of the things that Ellen and others have said in the chat, the lack of tiredness, basically, the sort of more energy they have from not having to go through the whole school day has helped. And also, I guess, the focus, when we come to do it, the focus, they've missed out on a lot of things. But if we've had this continual teaching going on, and our main focus is to help them access learning through, their whatever their accessible format is. So then, yeah, I've had that. I've had real improvements in reading fluency, especially.
And then there was a sort of bringing together 2 or 3 questions and observations. And what I'd like to do now is just to break up the theme a little bit. And in your reactions box at the bottom of your page, and now I'm using on the laptop, those of you who are using phones, access technology, iPads, it might be in a different place, there may be a different keystroke. One of the questions was, do services provide Braille training for family members? One of the things that fell out of that question was, or do you signpost, perhaps to UEB online?
We don't get involved in it. And when I saw the comment about the Braille Club, I think that was Ellen saying that, about the Braille Club, I thought, what a fantastic idea. We have been discouraged in the past, and hopefully we can reconsider this. We have been discouraged in the past to do anything else other than signpost, because basically, I think because we're on teachers' pay and conditions, and it's seen, and we have a bought-in service, and our hours are supposed to be directed at the pupil. And it is, I mean, I do feel that it hasn't been allocated as a sort of, a designated area of extra time, whereas training teaching assistants definitely has, but not involving the parents in it. And I think it's a really good idea. We could easily do that, involve the parents in some of that training that we're giving the teaching assistants, actually.
I think that's an interesting point. One of the things that I hadn't considered when those questions and comments started to come through was, of course, lots of services are constructed and structured in very different ways. So yes, bought-in services, contracted out services, it will depend on perhaps the nature of the service as well. But again, I think Stacey talked about maybe positive things that can come out of the last few months is maybe a reshaping of service at times, and a lot more contact with families who maybe now feel more confident in requesting a service rather than being passive acceptors of the service that they've been told they can have in the past. So I would suggest as service deliverers, that's something we could be looking at. What do families want from us, as well as settings? Okay, moving on. I hope that answered that question a little bit, Angie, but maybe gave you more questions to go away and think about. One of the points Claire made was the need to build reading stamina as well. And I wondered, Ellen, if you could talk about maybe your experience with Theo. Stamina.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Theo loved the early stages of reading. He loved the pictures, he loved making books, and then we sort of almost hit a wall where he had to basically read a lot of Braille, and I think, it was hard for him, and you feel slower than everyone around you, and it gets a bit frustrating. So I didn't lock him in his room and make him read Braille for an hour every evening, but just trying to create a bit of time in the day when he was reading. So getting the right books that he was interested in to read, Trying to have some diagrams or pictures in them because he really liked that for motivation, and then finding a time that was good for him to read. So and then eventually I did find him reading Harry Potter under the covers, and that was, you know, that was the sort of the big win. So I guess that those are the things that have helped. Creating time and space, getting the right materials under his fingers, and reading in different ways. So having the book maybe electronically on his Braille Note Touch, or his Orbit reader or whatever, or on his phone, so that when he's in the car he can read as well. So also just so that you don't have to be just in one place with one piece of equipment or one hard copy book, and being able to read in different places and spaces. And I think you can also do it with Audible and listen to some bits and read some bits, and that's also helped. Sometimes if I read one chapter and then he reads the next chapter, that's another little strategy that's helped us at home, because it's just motivating, so he doesn't feel like it's too slow. So that moves the story on a bit. That's helped with stamina too.
Okay, that's brilliant. And one of the things Claire suggested was that, and you're on here somewhere, Claire, and thank you for your contributions, about using high interest, low vocabulary books. And I guess that ties in with what you're saying, Ellen, which is it adds a dynamism to the reading as well, rather than student sometimes feeling as though they're plodding through
Sure.
a piece of text. And that the coding and understanding, Anna, that you referred to earlier. Thought about?
Yeah, I think also that the different things that they can read. I mean, try teaching Braille to a reluctant 18-year-old. Is you find all sorts of ways to get them to read it. I mean, I used to transcribe train timetables, because there was one of the students was big on trains, so I made him read train timetables and write all the stops out because he knew them all from memory. Lyrics. I mean, just trying anything to get them to read, if chasing around the college didn't work. That was a joke, by the way, just in case.
Thank you. Okay, if we move us on, Katerina, thank you. Asks, does the panel have a view on the need for parents or carers learning grade 1 and or grade 2 Braille? Jean, back to you.
Again, it's, you know, it depends who it is, doesn't it? I mean, parents are as varied as the kids are, really. For some of the parents, grade 1 is a step too far. And for others, you know, that they're everywhere. I mean, I do feel that, yeah, having a Braille club might help. But I do think, but some of the parents would definitely have found that threatening as well, and they would have avoided it. But yeah, some parents would benefit from it, and it's definitely something I'd think about. I think that then you just have to see where they are. It's almost like deciding. That they'll maybe almost decide for themselves, won't they? You can tell them that your child has now learned these contractions, and present it to them in a way that they find easiest to take in. But then you know, you will see from them whether they're actually willing to take it up or not. I really think you have to just play it by ear, really. And I wouldn't want to push anyone if they've managed to learn the alphabet after a couple of years, and they are really happy with that and not ready to move on, then yeah, I would sort of leave it, put the information there, you can take it up if you want to, really.
Stacey, feel free to tell me to mind my own business, but was it a discussion that you had around to Braille or not to Braille in your family?
Yeah, absolutely. It was quite an interesting experience for me, because I was left to make the decision as to whether or not I wanted to learn Braille. So when I was about, I think it's after I learned touch typing, which was the best thing I ever learned at the age of 7. When I was about 9 or 10, they started teaching me Braille. And it was interesting because they didn't have wonderful resources back then. So I think, from my memory, the Braille books we had to read were not the most inspiring for a young child. So I, you know, they sort of bribed me with them. Oh, they'll read me the Magic Wishing Chair if I read X number of books of Braille. So we sort of did it that way. But it came to the point where I was, you know, sort of 12, 13 and about to go to secondary school, and they said, you know, do you want to continue learning Braille? But I was at mainstream school, so it was something that was different. You know, no one else was reading it, so I said no. And I still regret that to this day, although I couldn't have, known what, impact my decision would have. But it was really interesting, just how much it was my decision to make, but probably I wasn't in the best place to make it. So yeah, I dabble a bit now, but I'm one of these, I can only read the alphabet.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think certainly as more and more of the young people we work with are in mainstream, I think, and just even the media pushing, things like, as Ellen mentioned earlier, things like Audible, and it becoming the norm to listen to a book in the car or as you run or when you're at the gym. More and more of the students we're working with are saying, well, can't I just have it digitally as well? And as Stacey says, maybe you haven't quite got the motivation or the life experience to make a decision themselves around the use of tactile reading as well. Ellen, back to you. You talked about the opportunity to work alongside the QTVI and just get an insight as to where Theo was at the time and how valuable that was.
Yes, yeah. I mean, attending Braille lessons, not all Braille lessons, but some of the Braille lessons was massively, massively useful to me. It didn't take any more time for the service. It meant they didn't have to tell me what they were doing. I could just sit in the corner and watch. And then when Theo got frustrated at home or got stuck, I could help him. And that made that relationship between us as well easier, because I could do what most sighted parents can do, which is help if somebody's stuck on a word or the technique is not working. If I could see his fingers doing some action that we're not aiming for, I could just give that nudge as well. Watching someone do something is very different to reading it in a book or getting a set of guidelines. That's what I find anyway. So it really helped me to have that opportunity. I mean, I was lucky. I started, I was in Belgium for several years, so I had to be very actively involved in his early learning of Braille, and all his early Braille lessons actually took place at home and were done by a blind teacher. So I got used to seeing how that happened, and that really helped me in my learning.
Anna, do you feel that there is scope perhaps to develop Braille classes for students as well as family members?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a really good idea if we could use technology like Zoom, which we're not, some people aren't supposed to, but things like Microsoft Teams or things like that, to actually have a Braille club. I mean, for example, I'm already going to try and nab Jean to try and teach me how to use the Orbit reader. So if you don't mind waiting, Jean, that would be really helpful. So things like that, I think that would be amazing if we could link in Braillists from around, I don't know, different area districts or maybe the whole country. That would be amazing, I think. That would be a really, really good idea. And I think it would be a really positive move for those students, particularly the reluctant Braillists, to actually see that Braille is still alive and still has meaning in society today. So yeah. So if you don't mind staying, Jean, that would be really great. Thank you.
That's right. And just for those of you who maybe haven't looked at the chat yet, Stacey has helpfully put up a Learning Braille hyperlink in the chat. And quite a few people now are saying things like, this is something that we could develop. One colleague has admitted to kicking themselves. They didn't think about it weeks ago, but I think you're probably in the majority there as well. Something else that's been said, those of us who work in sensory services, the apparent increase in engagement of the parents of HI children as opposed to the parents of VI children. Again, Jean, is that something you experience in your part of the world?
I don't really know. I'm not really sure about our HI service. I mean, there are a lot more of them than there are of ours. I mean, I suppose, yes, from the point of view of some of the parent initiatives we've tried to set up, sometimes it's been very difficult to get parents to come to things or to commit to bringing their children to things where we want to get them together. That's been really hard. And I don't know. There's some things I think happened easier with the HI team, but they haven't actually tried as many things as us. So, the things they've done though have worked. So, yeah, I think so. I do think for all of us though, this, we're in a new world, aren't we? Where we've had to do this all remotely, and then we see actually the technology was there all along, and we could have been doing this. And we could have, not had to have people who haven't got a car trying to get to the other side of the county and, all those sorts of things. We could have been doing quite a lot of stuff remotely, and we will be in the future.
Thank you. Stacey, there's a specific question come in, and the question is, does RNIB include tactile pictures in the Braille books that you produce?
So we currently have the 3000 that I mentioned in RNIB Bookshare. So at the moment, I think there are some books in RNIB Bookshare that has got described images in it. To be honest, tactile images is the one thing that we're trying to push a lot more, because publishers are talking about described images a lot. And actually, we're trying to say to them, that's wonderful, but we also need more tactile images. So at the moment, we don't have anything in RNIB Bookshare. We have stuff that's come through our transcription service, but then due to rights issues and things like that, we're not able to put them on RNIB Bookshare at the moment. But it is something that we're working towards, and we would really like to see more tactile and more described images on RNIB Bookshare in the next year.
And I'm sure you are, but I feel on behalf of all the delegates here today, are you also talking to publishers about how important the combination of the two are?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's one of the key things that I put across, because it's not a solution just to give a described diagram. It's not a solution just to give a tactile one. So, for example, I can't understand tactile diagrams on their own. I would need it described with the tactile in order for me to sort of what that diagram's trying to represent in the most case. So yeah, that's absolutely the message that publishers are getting from us.
Thank you all. One more specific question, and then I think we will start to round up the discussion. So that's just putting panel members on alert, and delegates, if you've got any questions that you'd like to dive in with for the last few minutes. One of the questions has been that certain bits of technology give the option to be flexible with grade 1 and grade 2 Braille, that you're not essentially clicking over from grade 1 input to grade 2 input. Jean, any experience with that you'd like to share?
Well, the Orbit Reader is like that. So if you put it in, then you get, it doesn't change it like it does. I mean, and I think, yeah, on the new Braille Note, somebody might correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe on the Braille Note Touch, it does correct it. Yeah, it does. I'm pretty sure it does still corrects it. So when you're in grade 2, after you've written a word, it changes it. Ellen is nodding. It changes it into grade. So if you Braille it in grade 1, it changes it to grade 2. So yeah, with the Orbit Reader, it doesn't. And I imagine so with any other Braille display, if you're using it in note taker mode, it will still be the same. I have had a few issues with some other Braille displays putting mistakes in the middle of words when you're using a screen reader. But so like, so for example, and that happens a bit as well when using voiceover a bit. So sometimes you have to be really careful of it. But if you use the Braille note taker in note taking mode, then there shouldn't, a Braille display in note taking mode, there shouldn't be a problem in it.
No.
Anyone else? Any
if any people are starting to put some very specific things in the group chat, so I would refer colleagues to the group chat while we're doing that around Braille Note Plus and learning tables. Question that's just popped in there from Claire is introducing Braille to a child, or I guess Anna, in your case, a young person with EAL.
Yeah, I can't say I have no, that's not true. I did teach somebody EAL Braille, but he was an adult and he was already familiar with Braille from his own country, I think. So he picked it up fairly quickly. What he struggled with was understanding. The reading of it was no problem, but the understanding and putting it into practice was sort of linked to what he was learning within his English classes. So he struggled with that bit, and I think in the end he chose to use JAWS rather than to continue with English Braille. So I've not had much experience with that. So I'm sorry that I can't really answer that question too well.
I had a similar experience with a 17-year-old Hungarian speaker, stroke Brailleist, or both, who arrived in Norwich overnight, and that was the understanding, because just the physicality of reading the Braille he picked up really quickly, but the expressive writing he found much more difficult, because he was trying. It was that back to that just encoding issue that you raised earlier. He wanted to work so hard to translate in his head, he couldn't get the Braille out. The Orbit grant is still available, apparently. Thank you, Stacey. Stacey's just posted that link into the chat as well. And Stacey, another question that's just come up, because I got your attention there. Books being PDFs, and is it possible to get a Word version so that services can perhaps translate part of the book or all of the book into Braille?
I believe in Adobe now, you can actually open PDFs, sorry, not in Adobe, in Microsoft Word. So I have it set up on my machine here that if I click on a PDF, it automatically opens it in Microsoft Word. The quality of that depends on the source file, of course, so some of them look better than others, but I think it is a feature now, certainly it is on this laptop, of Microsoft Word. So it'd be really, if anyone else has any experience of that, that would be really good to know as well, but that's certainly an option. From a Bookshare perspective, we can't convert the PDFs, but any of the EPUBs that are up there, and there's a few 100,000 EPUBs, any of those can be automatically opened in Microsoft Word. So you can actually click a setting that says whenever you open this EPUB, open it in MS Word. And if there's any PDFs that you really do need in Word, then we're happy to work with you to contact publishers and say, do you have this as an EPUB or a Word file instead?
That's really useful. I think sometimes local authorities, certainly in Norfolk, slightly lag behind in terms of upgrading software. So maybe the version of Windows that you have, the version of Microsoft Office that you have as well, can impact on the ability. And so I find we have to make, often the students we work with have got much better versions of Windows and Office than we do as practitioners. Other people experience that. Apparently, I'm going into chat mode now, revision guides are a nightmare to open.
This was a really interesting point. So one of the things that we were pushing for early this year was to get a grant for RNIB Bookshare so that we could have a hand in making revision guides more accessible, because they're not. And they're not great, and we do acknowledge that. And so Bookshare and the Children, Young People and Families team in RNIB have been sort of ganging up, if you like, to get funding for that specifically. And it sort of took a bit of a backseat because of COVID-19, which was a bit unfortunate, but it's something that's very much on the radar of our fundraising teams. So our aim is to get funding for that and then have a specific role for making revision guides a lot more accessible.
Can I ask, on behalf of colleagues here today, the Children and Young People's team's role in that is also about informing the publishers of perhaps their moral and or legal responsibilities to the students we work with as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So that tends to be more me that does that, or the Bookshare team, but certainly we work very closely with the children, young people and families team, and we intend to do more going forward. And yeah, absolutely, a big part of that is going to be advocacy based and looking and lobbying and looking at, engaging with publishers where we can't get the revision guides made accessible. We would hope to do that with the grant money, but a big part of it's going to be making sure that publishers know that they need to make the revision guides accessible, because it's really not in a great place right now.
It's usually parents who go out and buy revision guides, isn't it, for their children? And I guess it's just worth remembering that there are lots of parents out there of Braillists who would help with your advocacy and campaigning on this, because we're the ones who can't just click buy on Amazon.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
You've got lots of parents who will support your cause on that.
That would be brilliant. It would be great. It would be really good, I think, to have a lobbying group, if you like, or a consortium that has a lot of members that actually can take a more joint approach, not just for revision guides, but also looking at things like images. There could actually be a lot of mileage in having a unified approach to publishers and saying, it's not one or two of us, it's a lot of us.
And it's a very specific need as well. Perhaps Sarah and Ellen from Look, as opposed to Ellen, a parent linked to Look, that is something we could explore in discussions later about some joint work around that.
Yeah, we'd love to be involved with that.
That's great. Thank you, Stacey, and thank you, Ellen, for bringing that to our attention. Just a couple of points before we start to wrap up. There's been some questions about the Orbit Reader and how the instruction manual isn't always as easy to follow as people maybe would expect. Apparently there's fantastic videos on YouTube and they are easy to follow. So that is something. And Look are seeking to develop online Braille events for children and young people as well. So if you do have families who are interested, it is events at look-uk.org is the best contact for that. I'm hoping that's the best contact. Ellen?
I think John Summers just put this comment up there, but there is a day coming up with New College Worcester, I believe, where they're doing a training session on the Orbit Reader as well.
That's great.
Please, somebody know. So has New College. Yes, the training session on the Orbit Reader at New College Worcester is taking place on Monday the 13th.
13th, yeah.
Yeah, which is 6 days from now, I take it. Good, okay, thank you, colleagues, for your contributions. I feel it has made the afternoon go with a bit of a swing. In terms of closing comments, I think we've covered a lot of areas linked to Braille, and that really ties in with the parental webinar that we ran last week, where it was parents of Braillists who had particular observations, concerns, and celebrating new ways of working and different ways of working that they wanted to bring to our attention. And hopefully we can all take this back to our services when we start to roll out what will be a new type of delivery, I would think, in the future. What we've asked panel members to do over the last few weeks is to come up with a top tip or two. And I wonder if we could start again with you, Ellen, around your top tips.
I have to try and remember what it was now. You know what?
I'll write it down if that helps.
No. It will come.
Okay.
I guess I go back to the fact that every family in their own way will want to support their child's learning. And it's about making literacy a holistic experience that has a massive impact for VI children. So if you can get that relationship with the family, keep it live. I know VI services often really do engage with families early on, over the early years. And if that can be kept live, not to such an extent, but actually keeping it there, I think that can make a huge difference if we work together as a holistic team around that access to literacy.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. So it is making sure that team is around the child and making sure that access to literacy. I'd just like to come back to you, Ellen, with one point that you made earlier today, but you really struck a chord with a lot of people last week is that literacy isn't just about reading, it's also about writing and creating, and how important that is for Theo as well, to get his message out there.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, I waved our little, paper book. We made so many books when he was little, and that is what has inspired him. And now what he's doing is he's got this Tactile Times. So he's started his own little newspaper by Braillists for Braillists. And he's got a little team of editors. They're all Braillists. And his mission is to get it out there and get Braillists all working together to produce something that is, works for them. So he's taken his writing kind of passion on, and I'm just, and he's being able to do that independently.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Jean, over to you for your top tip.
I think one of the things that helps is demonstrating to parents how to relate the written text that the child might still be struggling with to their growing understanding of the world, to their building their concepts of the world, and their imagination as well. Literacy is not just about the real world, it's also about this imaginary magical world that actually they may have difficulty imagining in the same way as a sighted child, but they've still got imagination. If we can also encourage that and their own fantasy worlds, and then it brings in that love of story and the desire to read.
Thank you. And I think it is likely that we're all readers, and reading takes us all into that other world, doesn't it? No matter who's producing it. So, and it is important that the students we work with don't miss out on that, the magicality. I'm sure that's a sort of word that Gwyneth McCormack would use. The magicality of reading, or the readingness of reading, is important. Anna.
So my top tip is to start with the student, identify their learning styles, consider the time frame, consider their emotional readiness, and consider and use alternative technology alongside the learning of Braille.
Thank you very much. And Stacey?
So my tip is around empowerment and knowing your rights and the rights of your children, the children you're working with. You have the right to have accessible content in the way that you need it, and you have the right to ask the publishers for that content. And if we can support you in doing that, please do let us know. And I think, just to add on, we talked about having groups perhaps set up, and I think that's another big thing that we should take away, that if we can act more, put on a more of a united front, get some groups together, get some lobbying going on, and maybe Theo can lead it. By the sounds of things, I think he'd be great. But I think there's a lot more we could do as a team.
That's great. Thank you, Stacey. So with that call to arms, thank you for joining us this afternoon. As I said at the start, the webinar will be available on both the Look and View websites as time progresses. But that will be down to Ellen and Sarah, which means it'll be done tomorrow, probably. What I'd like to say is just, it was great to see so many people involved today. And Look is a small but perfectly formed national organisation, very keen to work with services, with families, and with other organisations like View. And it is through that strength, as Stacey said there, it's working together that changes will be made. So thank you for your time, your forbearance for when the website went a bit wobbly, or the webinar went a bit wobbly. We are both membership organisations, so Rory Cobb would kill me if I didn't say, please join if you're not a member already. And please do sign up for the next session that will be pushed out, I guess. And I'm going to ask Ellen for Look just to drop in at the end. There will be more webinars. Have we got any in the pipeline?
Thanks, John. Yeah, we've got a few different ideas for future events. So what I'd say is just to keep an eye out on our social media, on our newsletter, on our website for information. It'll all be posted there when it's released. But we've got some more ideas in the works for more events. So thank you for joining us today.
Any final words, Ellen Johnson.
Just thank you very much for, you know, including me, and for you know, everyone who's come today. It's really exciting as a parent for, you know, to see everyone coming together and talking about these things. It really is, and really, you know, encourages me. So that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you for your time. Stacey, any final?
Just to echo Ellen's point, I think just thank you for having me. It's been great. There's certainly been a lot of food for thought for us in terms of what we can take away from that, and actions that we can take going forward. So yeah, I think there's a lot that's come out of this. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Stacey. Anna?
Just the same, really, to say thank you. And it's quite inspiring to realise that there's 85 people who gave up their time to take part in this. I think that's brilliant, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. And Jean, final words?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, whoever it was that invited me. And it was Rory. And I'm sure there's so many ideas from all the different people out there, and I've had some new ideas from looking at the comments today, so it's been great to be part of it. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you all. See you again soon.